Hello, I'm Noelle Lim on ASEAN Speaks by Maybank. The guest of this episode of C-Suite Talks is Datuk Tengku Taufik Tengku Aziz, President and Group CEO of Petronas. He discusses with Dato Fad'l Mohamed, the CEO of Maybank Investment Bank, about leading in uncertain times amidst the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the challenges of energy transition.
Firstly, Tengku Taufik, thank you very much for accepting our invite to speak on C-Suite Talks podcast series. You have had quite a fast-track career, from Petronas scholar to an early career at our national oil company here, and to being a CFO, to being a partner at PwC, and now full circle at Petronas as President and Group CEO. What was your journey like?
Allow me to begin by saying thanks for inviting me on this podcast. I think sharing and narratives around leadership journeys as well as tribulations around leading corporations in Malaysia is not as richly documented. So this is a great effort. So well done to you, Fad'l. The journey, if I was to attempt to describe it with one word, has been, for lack of a better cliche, a roller coaster. We naturally within the oil and gas industry are exposed to the vagaries of the market. Pronounced cyclicality, as you have observed, this has become even more challenging in recent years. But as a person growing through the energy industry, there have been high points and there have been low points, of course. I think all of us cannot profess to have a perfect career journey. You mentioned earlier, I was in fact, for all intents and purposes, a product of the scholarship system. I came in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and start serving the National Oil Corporation in 2000. I grew in the company at quite a decent pace. Come 2012, probably the itch to understand what the world outside became too overbearing, and I needed to know how entrepreneurs thought. And I did join a service contractor. I did join a conglomerate next door, dipping my toes into real estate as well as, of course, the services sector. As you know, I was, for a brief period, the CFO of Sapura Kencana before I returned into trying to build an oil and gas advisory with my ex-colleagues in PwC. I grew to become the partner. I progressed to become the partner in PwC's deals team, and I led the oil and gas work not only in Malaysia but also had the opportunity and privilege to contribute to the regional efforts. Then possibly the call to national duty happened after I did some work for the then government in 2018. I had no inkling I was going to be invited to such a senior role. I think that it was a bit of a shock to some people in Petronas. Thankfully, they were magnanimous enough, open enough to know that I had the shared values embedded in me and I only wanted the best for the national oil company. Again, a set of surprises led to at the turn of 2020, as we were about to approach this pandemic, an invitation to meet the then Prime Minister, discussing a transition of leadership. I thought nothing of it. I thought I was not really in the running. To my great surprise, this resulted in the appointment of myself as the President and Group CEO. Now, in this role, as there were highs and lows, but as I approached this role, immense pride, but also when I approached the task, it was one that gave me a lot of trepidation because this is an immense amanah. We are vested with the oil and gas and hydrocarbon resources of the country, and we are also clearly expected to have a catalytic role in growing the oil and gas industry, bringing in investment, working with partners of international stature, and kudos to my predecessors. We made the choice to go international in 1990s, and we now have a footprint of over 40 countries across the world, and we're a well-known name, not least of all because of F1. But I'd like to think more importantly, we're an NOC with an IOC DNA, and it is the shared values that has helped every individual in this company grow. So it's been exciting.
And coming in at the age of 47 in 2020, you were also one of the youngest to assume leadership of Petronas. And this was at the point of pandemic and still low oil prices. Leadership is not just about competency and capability, but also managing in terms of industry dynamics, people, and political change. So how do you do it?
It was July 2020, and to his great credit, the then Prime Minister mentioned that we realized that as a commodity, you're now increasingly exposed to cyclicality. He knew that Petronas was a linchpin and a cornerstone of the Malaysian economy. So he did ask, how far along are you in your plans to deal with diversification of revenue and energy transition? So even then, that conversation had happened. I explained to him, and one of my answers was, the demands of ESG are not fabricated, nor is it just a short passing trend. It is an expectation that all businesses will embrace ESG and move towards a decarbonized, more sustainable future. So we said to him, there will be a period of us having to go to invest quite heavily in the new foundations for Petronas. Already that was beset against a backdrop where we were wallowing in $20 to $30 per barrel Brent for the longest time in the early days of the pandemic. When Russia and Saudi Arabia could not coordinate at OPEC, we saw easily north of 7-8 million barrels of oil always in play, with the demand that suppressed during the pandemic. You will recall the world came to a standstill. While that happened, our operations were always under threat. We need people in the front lines. Getting us defined as critical services was a key priority then. We had ongoing challenges to our supply chains because we could not access the supply chains as regularly, as easily, or as seamlessly as before. So all of this converged in that loop, shall we say, in the middle of 2020. And of course, while all of that was happening in the background, geopolitics and the challenges to stability were rife all around the world, not only at home. And if that were put into one cocktail, it would have not been a pleasant drink, so to speak. And I think to the credit of the Petronas team, we managed to ensure reliability. You did not have lights go out in Malaysia at any point in time. Many of my predecessors always remark that one of the best legacies that they always get as they assume this role is a dedicated workforce, and I can't ask for any more than what I've enjoyed.
Maybe just touching on leadership, what do you think are key attributes in your view a leader should have?
This is a good one. In this age of uncertainty, being bold and decisive is definitely one key attribute. Number two is transparency and a willingness to be challenged, which is why we believe speaking up, core tenet within our cultural beliefs. And thirdly, but actually it should be the premier attribute, is integrity. You will always be challenged given the enormity of the task, the variety of stakeholders, sometimes just the sheer weight of bureaucracy, to do things that fall from white to grey to black. And it is how a leader navigates these situations, decisions when no one else is watching, that's going to define him or her as they grow throughout their career. Moving back to the first attribute, we now will always be an imperfect set of circumstances. So being bold and being decisive is more than anything for the people you lead. And with the second, I think if you think about being willing to be challenged, acknowledge that you don't know everything.
And I think from my dealings with you and working with you, you're a very decisive leader. And tell me, where did that confidence come from?
I would love to ask you why you thought that, but since you've already said the question...
I recall clearly on a couple of transactions.
Yeah, I know. We just have to make calls when sometimes the calls are painful to make or it is too vague. And situations are too vague. This is I think characteristic of, I think many people have written about this. We call this a VUCA environment. You make decisions that you believe, given the best available information, is right not only for you or for your team, but for all the possible stakeholders that are involved. A good example would be, why did Taufik, at the head of a national oil company, push for net zero carbon emissions in November 2020, having only assumed the role about 4 or 5 months earlier. I saw the trend. I could not wait until people imposed it upon us. We weighed the building blocks that were available to us and said, even with this kind of P50 information, could we make the journey? The belief set was yes, and that's the rallying call we had to make.
The energy trilemma of equity, security, and sustainability, where is the equilibrium? And how do you see Petronas and Malaysia transitioning to this low carbon economy? And also ASEAN, it's a very fossil-based and fossil source environment.
It's interesting you position the question as working towards an equilibrium, because it couldn't be more apt. The unfortunate situation with our energy markets today, it's a pendulum. And we're on one end of the pendulum where prices are elevated, supply security is a question, and we don't know whether investors are committed to a stable funnel of opportunities that will provide the world the energy it requires as it grows. And this is a very, very much a knee-jerk reaction. I say it's knee-jerk reaction because we shouldn't be surprised we're facing an energy crisis today. We are seeing this culminate over 5 or 6 years of underinvestment. I don't want to put any adjectives in front of underinvestment. I can say gross underinvestment or atrocious underinvestment, because the levels of investment that we've seen, I think relative to 2014 when prices were still relatively higher, we're wallowing at about 50-60% of those levels. People did not want to spend because when they saw the imminent ask of the energy transition and the imminent arrival of ESG as a guiding principle, they moved back. Investor groups did not want to put the capital at risk, did not want to allow itself to be facing a situation where capital was stranded 6-7 years down the line. But what happened? We didn't have a system to fall back on. And we are not yet ready to have a system that we can fully rely on without issues of intermittency. Solar is great, but the reality is you don't have daylight 24 hours. Offshore wind, not everywhere in the world, but we haven't fully invested in it. To stepping back and saying, we'll move there, but we won't do anything with what we do today, has proven to be disastrous. When the unfortunate situation unfolded in Ukraine, and when 155 billion cubic meters of natural gas were removed from the system, Europe suddenly learned the full extent of that. And in many other parts of the world, that scarcity is so pronounced now that prices are unbearable. We're seeing price caps. We're thinking about subsidies in jurisdictions you never thought would need subsidies.
Yeah.
So this is where I think we need, from an energy market which always swings violently as a pendulum, towards an equilibrium.
We were at COP27
Yes,
in
indeed.
Sharm el-Sheikh
Yeah.
recently. Conference concluded with a historic loss and damage fund. Do you think COP27 achieved its objectives?
Not all, I think. Not all. Loss and damage is a fantastic achievement. In Glasgow, I think Article 6 was the central theme of what they wanted to refine and define. Loss and damage has always been an ask of developing economies. Those who had emitted before us were partly responsible for this, and there's only one atmosphere, so the burden should be shared. And the damage, ironically, is now suffered by countries with the least emissions. Those with long coastlines, small island states facing rising waters and recurrent floods. We can't say that we don't know about this because we've been facing extreme and pronounced floods recently. I think the commitment towards getting absolute targets will need to be defined and agreed, and multilateral agreements across many regions will need to be in place for many items, not least of all carbon pricing, support for things like CCS, how you treat. Probably will need to get to a point where the world can function. Emissions are an externality. It's now been priced into the way we think we carry out our business. We need to behave accordingly, and I think there needs to be a guiding principle. And I do hope, with COP28 being in Abu Dhabi, in the heart of an energy-producing region, a degree of responsibility and coherence can be carved up and defined and shared better.
On innovation and digitalization, I think it's also an important aspect that comes into play. And how is Petronas looking at innovation and digitalization? And you have a corporate venture capital that you set up in 2019, I think. How's that going?
I'll answer that one last. We're very excited about that because I'll answer the last part first, rather. we're very excited about having venture capital being within the portfolio because we are sometimes so shackled by the delivery of a KPI by the year end or within a 5-year plan that we don't watch the fringes, things which can overturn the way energy demand is managed, energy is consumed, concepts around energy efficiency, facilities of the future. And these are the very areas that we put our eyes upon and cast our net to get into. They are early stage, in certain cases, plays and startups all over the world. We need to take early positions. Far too long, we use the, shall we say, scary fable of being another Kodak or another Nokia.
Sure.
Oops, I don't want to insult Nokia, but that's the reality. I think if you pivot too late and you don't take up certain bets. When we go back to the subject of innovation within what we do as our core activities, inevitably the demand on oil and gas to innovate is constantly there. We're always dealing with tougher acreages, more CO2 and contaminants in deeper waters at higher pressures and temperatures. So the engineering solutions that come to fruition, the embracing of new pivots is the one that takes a bit of time. And as far as technology, we do have, not many people realize this, we do have, I would say, a world-class research facility out in Bangi. People often associate Petronas with F1 as just a sponsor. That couldn't be further from the truth. I'd like to remind all Malaysians to be proud that it is the boys and girls in Bangi who help contribute to the fluid technology solutions that makes Mercedes a decent team this year. Okay. It has won a series of 8 constructors championships and has helped certain driver reach his heights. Kudos to Lewis. But what we do see is, to this end, F1's asked us for sustainable fuels. We're stepping up the challenge.
Great.
As electric vehicles come on board, we're going to deliver like Iona through our lubricants, and we are taking those stabs into spaces such as blue and green hydrogen, which is an adjacency naturally great for the oil and gas industry to pursue.
On the innovation and some of the things that you're working on in the venture side, how do you actually look at scaling up, especially commercializing it?
We have already got some, I would say, clear examples of how the applications that we saw through the technologies we seeded have been embraced and adopted in our own ecosystem. But beyond that, as the demands for the oil and gas industry also move further afield into getting to more remote operations, getting to zero flaring and venting, anything from having, have you seen Animal? You know, that robotic dog, having more explosive grade equipment being deployed for the safety of our people. We learned through the pandemic. We never fail to learn from a crisis. We always take that opportunity. Having less people on board means converting more to remote operations. What has that given us? A lower carbon footprint. Because you need to ship less supplies, less people. So all of these are embraced, and when these new technologies are adopted, at least within the context of our industry and the energy services, you know it's going to be taken on more and more and wider field within the industry. So we do hope the applications grow beyond the parameters of oil and gas.
Just closing up, what's the best piece of advice you've received throughout your career? And if you can go back in time to tell a young Tengku Taufik, what would you say?
Okay.
Sorry, younger Tengku Taufik.
Okay.
You are still young.
All right. I don't profess to be young anymore. I feel I've aged at twice the rate. Let's start with the second question first. I'd tell the young Tengku Taufik to take more chances. I think take more chances because sometimes because of your profession or vocation or prior academic background, you tend to be pigeonholed into a space that you are deemed to fit into. I think I have seen in my time with Petronas and also outside that sometimes you unleash a person's full potential not only because of what they can do or have been trained to do, but because they're passionate about it. And you won't know that niche until you try the things that you need to try. So that's number one. The first question, this one was This one was given to me by a person I served in Petronas who was seen as a stalwart of integrity and has unassailable character. The late Tun Azizan. Make a decision.
Brilliant.
That's probably why
Okay.
you asked earlier,
That's
right?
Yeah.
Make a decision. But in making the decision, after you make your decision, you can sleep at night. Thoroughness, the integrity, the transparency, the willingness to hear everyone. It needs to be applied in making a decision.
We're approaching the end of 22. What would you summarize the year has been for you? And what are you looking forward to in the new year?
We anticipated 22 to be the year that we recovered from the pandemic and saw a period of, say, increasing prosperity, transparency, and clarity. I think we could have seen a period further from the truth. We've seen so many things move, but I do believe Petronas will come through with a decent set of results in line with its peers. I think as we go forward, I'd like us in Petronas as well as the wider oil and gas industry and the energy services and solutions providers all over the world to be seen as part of the solution rather than being painted into a corner and being labeled as the villains of this piece we call energy transition.
With that, thank you very much to Tengku Taufik for sharing your thoughts and perspective on our podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All the very best. Thank you.
That was Datuk Tengku Mohamed Taufik Tengku Aziz, President and Group CEO of Petronas, speaking to Dato Fad'l Mohamed. Tune in for more C-Suite Talks. I'm Noelle Lim on ASEAN Speaks by Maybank.